I will talk today about this poem called 三川观水涨二十韵, watching the flood at 3 rivers, 20 couplets. So we have, again, quite a long poem, though, of course, nothing compared to what I did last time, which was already a few months back, with the 100-rhyme poem written at the start, just before the start of the great Anlushan rebellion. And now the rebellion is in full swing, and to this poem there is an original note which says that in the 7th month of the 15th year of the Tianbao era, that is in our calendar the year of our Lord 756, escaping from the rebels. Okay, so that is the entire original note. So this refers to the fact that Anlushan's rebel forces, escaping from the rebels, his rebel forces had captured the capital of Chang'an. So the general course of the Anlushan rebellion was that the initial stages of the Anlushan rebellion was that Anlushan with his army rebelled in the northeastern frontier area of the empire, and very swiftly he moved down, and within a month or so of declaring rebellion he had taken Luoyang, which was the next most important city in the empire and the biggest city on the eastern side of the passes. And then in the summer of the same year, Chang'an also fell to the rebels, and Du Fu then, like most of the population, fled. And this is written during his flight. He went at first on foot to this place which is called Sanchuan. So where is Sanchuan, you wonder? We have heard of Sichuan, but not Sanchuan, perhaps. It is a small place that's basically straight due north from Chang'an, and it is where 3 rather minor streams meet. And this poem, it describes the flooding of this area on this occasion. So it so happened that the initial stages of the Great War coincided with, in this particular part of China, with some bad weather, rains and flooding. And Du Fu, he describes this in this rather long poem. But Du Fu's poems, when it comes to weather and the natural environment, they are never entirely descriptive. It's not just about the natural phenomenon at hand. He's also putting in a sort of commentary on the general situation of his times and of the empire. And it is indeed sometimes a little bit difficult to differentiate between the general situation that he and his countrymen and the known universe, actually more or less to his from his perspective, suddenly found itself in, and the natural disasters that he observes and which he writes in the poem. And this sense is quite when you learn to listen to it, I think it is one of the most interesting charms of the poetry of Du Fu, and not just Du Fu, but it is he uses this kind of writing to very interesting effect in many poems. And I've already talked about one such poem in a video I did ages ago, many years ago, which is also on this channel, when I talk about a poem which I might get back to in this series, of the heat and the summer drought. And that is also a sort of a metaphor, and is taken as a reflection of the general state of the empire. And as such, it is here as well. So that is basically the general situation. And let's talk now about the lines, because this poem contains many interesting lines, and also it is quite beautiful. So let's have a look. 我进花园来，不复见平路。So we have the translation before us, so we don't have to go through all of this. But when you read it just like that, 花园, perhaps you don't understand that it is a place name. It's the place that he passed by, basically, on his way to Sanchuan. And when after he passed Huayuan, he did not see level land, the plain, Pinglu, the plain. So this is where more hilly country starts to the north, because on the northern edge of the Guangzhong Plain, where Chang'an is located, the Los Plateau starts rising quite abruptly. So from a certain point on, the level land recedes and hill country begins, and he is penetrating into this area from the south to the north along the Luo River, which we will see later in the poem as well. 北上为土山，连天走穷谷。To the north, there was only Earthgate Mountain. So there is, which also my annotated edition tells me, a place here called Tumenshan, Earthgate Mountain. And according then to my commentators, and according also to Owen here, that is what is referred to here. I'm not so sure if that is the only reasonable way to interpret this sentence, because Beishang, going towards the north, there was only mountains of earth. It seems also to correspond quite well with what the geology is here, because it is largely this sedimented loess soil. So mountains of earth could also be a descriptor. 北上为土山, or even perhaps 土 and 山, earth and mountains of bare earth, something like that. And that would also be a nice parallel with the next line, 连天走穷谷. Actually, there is no demand for parallelism in this form that Du Fu is using here, and not all of the lines in this poem are parallel. So that's not in itself, something that tells us that there needs to be this or that signification for this Tu Shan. But when it says just Tu Shan, mountains of earth, it is not apparent to me that it really has to be short for Tu Men Shan. 连天走穷谷, I hurried through barren valleys stretching to heaven. So 连天, Owen thinks that it means stretching to heaven. Yes, why not? I think that is perfectly reasonable. But I think also 连天 might also simply mean 连日, like day after day. Day after day, several days in a row, he passes through, or he hurries through 穷谷. Here I want to disagree a little bit with Owen's translation. He says barren valleys. 穷, in the sense of poor, would perhaps, in a sort of transferred significance, mean applied to a valley barren. But I also think it might also mean more like just deep valleys and secluded valleys. So I have my interpretation here differs a little bit from Owen's. I hurried day after day through deep valleys would be my translation. 火云无始出，飞电常在目. So here we have, I think, very nice, straightforward, rhythmic, and easy to understand lines. 火云无始出, 火云, fiery clouds. I think 火云, fiery clouds, sounds like an oxymoron. I think it might also refer to simply the clouds of summer, because we are now in the 7th month. It is the end of summer, probably in August or beginning of September. So the clouds of summer, they are pregnant with thunder, of course. 火云, they constantly appear. And 飞电, flying lightning, are constantly before his eyes. So this is the source of the rising waters that I mentioned in the title, and that will be described later. So the source of these rising waters is made clear here at this point. 自多穷秀宇，行老相辉促. Here is perhaps a little bit the difficulties of language. 自多穷秀宇，行老相辉促. I don't really agree at all with this barren peaks. Here again, I think Owen interprets this 穷 character a little bit differently than it should be. I think 穷 again means something like deep, and 秀 is not at all peaks. I don't think this is a valid translation at all, but perhaps it is my lack of culture and my lack of understanding of the Chinese language that tells me this is wrong. But xiu means mountain cave, and I think the idea here is quite straightforward, quite plainly this, that caves on the hills emit clouds, and from the clouds comes the rain. This is perhaps faulty natural science, but it is intuitive, and I dare say that this is what how Du Fu saw it, because it certainly can appear to an uneducated or less discriminating eye that if you look at a peak in the morning, it is surrounded by clouds, and that might be because the vegetation emits these causes these clouds to form. But it might look as if you could have the idea, at least, that perhaps there were springs inside of the earth that caused these clouds to come out from veins inside of the mountain, the caves, xiu. So because there was such a lot of water, there was such a lot of rain emerging from these caves. That's why we have the floods which are described here. So 行老相辉促. 行老, this is also perhaps a little bit of a strange word. 老, it is water that has accumulated after raining. So that is, which is then traveling. So the traveling water, they crash roaring together, as Owen says. Yes, so 辉促, this is of course a very unusual word. 辉 is to strike against. It tends to be used in an onomatopoeic way, and a tu is of course to be urgent, straightened, or narrow. So things are smashed together in one place, and it rains, and all the water is floating around on the ground. And the language difficulties continue. 吻隔川气黄，群流汇空区. 吻隔, this is exceedingly rare and difficult. A welling confluence, yes. I mean, Owen, he makes has to make a fist of it somehow, doesn't he? So 吻, we can see here with the grass radical up here. This character in itself signifies the lushness of vegetation, and ge, on the other hand, this is like a dictionary word. It's something that is almost not this is something that is almost not encountered in actual real life. And the dictionary definition is to surround on all sides. But are there examples of this? I'm not sure. It's a very unusual, and it's also, when you look at it, I tried to look this up before, and it's also not written uniformly the same way, which is often the case with these very rare characters. And there are always these little obscurities like this in any language, and for this word as well, the pronunciation isn't entirely clear either. I said 吻隔, but it seems that 科 is another possible pronunciation. So 吻科, I mean, something that is lushly welling up and surrounding something on every side. Well, this is the idea that we should get, and Owen just says a welling confluence. Yes, why not? And actually, also, I think that this might be simply also an adverb, not so much a noun as Owen wants it. So perhaps just an adverb for how the 川气 is so 黄. Okay? And let's look at that. So the three characters here, 川气黄, the river vapor yellow. What does this mean then? So the vapor of the river to begin with is rather strange. Perhaps, this qi, this 川气, actually just refers to the water, because qi is sometimes used to mean sort of the look of things, the way, the actual matter of the physical universe in its aspect of appearance. So this 川气 is the sort of appearance of the river being very yellow, and perhaps it takes on the color of the Tushan, the earth mountains, and this gives a very 吻歌. I decline to translate this right now. A 吻歌 impression. And all the streams 群流会空区. So how do we parse this? Three very common characters, but I'm still not sure either how to parse it. So we have Owen's version is converge in empty bends. 会空区. This makes little sense, I think. I mean, it goes very well in a grammatical sense, but what is the picture that we should get here? Because the river is flowing and it's flooded. Where are the empty bends? There shouldn't be any empty bends in this river, should there? It should be all full, and perhaps the bends that are sometimes empty, now they are full of streams that are converging. Does this make sense to you? I'm not sure if it makes sense. Another possibility, I think, is that all the streams 去, so this would be the verb, and 会空 would be the adverb, the manner in which they 去, in the manner in which they bend. They bend by meeting in emptiness. Perhaps, in a place, in a spot above where the normal river surface is, it bends and swirls there. So in the emptiness, in the air, so to speak, it meets in the air and bends there. I'm not sure if this is more correct, but I think it's a possibility. This character Kung here, it is quite strange. Maybe it's just it refers probably to the air, but perhaps also some other empty space here. I'm not sure. The water, anyway, it fills up all available space, and it also makes great waves. 倾城望高浪，忽为阴崖薄. This first line is unproblematic. I won't talk more about it. 忽为, I immediately said to myself, the southern slopes would collapse. Well, 阴崖, the shady slope, so the shady slope of a river would be the southern slopes, because the southern slope of a river would be the place where the sun has the most difficulty reaching. And 薄 means to fall over, but in an extended sense, to be destroyed, collapse. So that is what we have here. 倾城望高浪，忽为阴崖薄. Well, are they collapsing or not? Well, it seems that they are, because they scare the hell out of all the living creatures here. Look at this. 孔泥灿蛟龙，灯微巨麋鹿. There are dragons and deer that are escaping and collecting. 孔泥, fear of being mired, Owen says. This is correct, because ni here, ni of course means the mud, but there's no particular reason for the dragons to be afraid of the mud. Ni is also to be stuck in the mud. So 孔尼灿蛟龙, dragons are escaping or hiding away. And climbing perilous spots, again, both of these two word phrases function as adverbials for the rest of the sentence. Congregating 麋鹿 deer. I'm not sure exactly what kind of deer this is, I'm sorry. The natural creatures, anyway, they try to escape the calamity. And more, 枯茶卷拔树, 雷葵共冲色. The syntax here is tortured, but the natural world is also being tortured, so this is perhaps a good thing from a poetical standpoint. Ku cha, leafless logs. Well, ku is withered. Cha, the original sense of this word is raft, but it can't really be a raft here. What would a withered raft look like? More like probably like logs or sticks, withered sticks. Roll and tear up trees, or that perhaps these the withered sticks are the trees that have been rolled, or that have been torn up in a rolling manner, something like this. It could be that this ku cha is the same as the 卷拔树. And then when we get to this next line, it's a little bit easier, because this 雷葵, while it is an unusual word, it has a quite firm and established meaning. It's a mass of sand and stones, heaps of rocks, which is what Owen says. And gung, together with, well, together with the uprooted trees, one has to assume they block up. What they block up? What? Well, they block up the river, or the flow of water. More in more general, they block up the water. 声吹鬼神下，是月人带宿. More difficult lines. He is really being it's not being very merciful for our sense of normal syntax here. No. We have to try to listen very hard what he's trying to say. Well, at least the first one I think is easy. 声吹鬼神下, spirits descend, spirits, 鬼神, they descend on the wind as the sound of it blows, something like that. So the sound, perhaps also the sound of the flood, is blowing the gods and spirits down from their abodes. But then we have this line, which is really difficult. 是月人带宿. Probably this translation is entirely wrong. That's what I think. I think it says 是月 is what actually happens, and 人带宿 is a description of how. This is sort of an adverbial to this short sentence. With the speed, 速, of human generations, the 是 is 月影, so this more or less the scene is changing, something like this, because 是 is both the force, but also the force is also the force, the actual situation can also be called 是, because the forces that are active and affect the present situation, they are its 是, so they are the situation. And 月 is to change, but it means to pass by, but it also to experience something, in the sense that one suddenly has a perspective of all the time that has passed by. So in the modern Chinese, there's 月里. Someone who has 月里he has more than 经历, 经验, experience. Someone who has 阅历 has really been with us for a long time, and he has seen lots of things and acquired a good understanding of his experiences. And this 月 thus means to pass by in this sense, to pass before one's eyes as this with the speed of human generations. Well, this is very strange, isn't it? This is quite a strange metaphor. What I think is it goes back to here. He sees the southern slope, or he sees the slope of the river crumbling. So it perhaps formations in the rock, or formations in this sort of sedimented sand that has looked like the same way for many generations, or for a couple of generations. Suddenly they just crumble, and it's as if you can see the edifice of human generations crumble before your eyes. And now, from this point on, he really starts to weave in with his descriptive lines a sense that he's also describing the fate of the empire, the general historical situation. And I think that this is very intentional, because otherwise this couplet, it would be an extremely far-fetched simile to say that the scene changes with the speed of human generations, because human generations aren't fast, but sometimes things happen that really accomplish changes that correspond to many human generations, events that have the effects of several human generations. Not gradual change, and these kind of changes, they are really underway. And Du Fu has the sense that something is really about to be swept away and be replaced, perhaps with something new, something else. And this prompts a sort of meta comment on the entire situation, which I think really has to be read metaphorically. 不有万学归，何以尊四读? The translation here is unfortunate, because I think it's not wrong really, but I think it acquires a little bit of the wrong emphasis. So let's go through this. 不有万学归，何以尊四读? So 万学 is contrasted with 四读. What are these things? So 学, Owen translates as springs, and the chain of associations is more or less that 学, the original meaning is cave, and then in a more sort of broader sense, opening, and here channels for water. So channels for water perhaps could be springs. 四读, the 四读 in itself just means ditch or a drain, but the 四读 is a concept, it's a word you might say, and it refers to the 4 largest rivers in China. So, well, not exactly the 4 largest rivers, but in the sort of, they are mentioned together like this. There's the Yangtze River, Jiang, and the Huanghe, and then we have the Huaihe as well, and the Jihe. These were the 4 largest rivers, and they were called the Great Drains because all of them, they drain into the sea. And I think the way to translate this is that if it wasn't for the fact that the myriad springs, or the myriad channels, or the myriad little streams find their way to the great rivers, why would we honor them so much, honor the 4 great rivers so much? We honor the 4 great rivers, or they are exalted in their position. It's not just that we honor them, they are honorable, they are honored, they are exalted because they receive the waters of so many different streams, So that is the natural order of things, Things run in their prescribed channels, more or less. And when they flow in the same large channels, chaos is tamed. And otherwise, when this situation does not prevail, well, chaos does ensue. And Du Fu then talks about this here. 机关全员长, 反据江海复. But when I see that the very sources of the rivers flood, I'm afraid that the great river and the sea are flowing backwards. Flowing backwards is what this means, not spilled out. Really not spilled out. I don't think Owen really gets the point here at all. Because fu, it means to turn over, turn something on its back, And I think that the intended image is clearly that the waters are starting to run, from the great rivers, from the sea towards the head springs. The natural order has been reversed, or at least Du Fu is afraid that the natural order is reversed like this. And this is really, well, why not? It's just a great image of rebellion and political chaos as well. Things used to flow in their normal channels, and the sources of political authority are clear. We know who are the leaders, but suddenly, everything is turned upside down, and we don't know where the waters flow anymore. So this is an immensely dangerous situation, and we will see why. 飘沙银暗去，树鹤松柏秃。银暗 bounds and banks depart. So anyway, this is so strange because I think for both 飘 here and 树, I think the subject here, actually here for both of these verbs is the water. So swirling the sands, both bounds and banks depart, well, meaning then that, they disappear from our view because the water is rising. And 树鹤, scouring the valleys, when the water scours the valleys, the pines and cypresses are made bald. Bald. 腾林破山门，回卧列地轴。Rising over hills, it smashes gates of mountains, so the subject is still understood to be the water. It rises over hills and it smashes the gates of the mountains. 山门, I think in actual fact this is just the same meaning-wise as we would say 山口, the mouth of a valley. But of course 山门 is a lot more poetical, isn't it? Whirling around, still the water is whirling around. It splits the Earth's axis. 地轴, it's a conventional simile. It's a conventional picture. This sort of it evokes the idea of the Earth having a subterranean structure that holds up the Earth and keeps it in place. And now that structure is in danger of collapsing. 交落赴红河，几关起信宿。Joining the law, still I think still absolutely still the water is the subject. When it joins the law and goes to the great river, 红河, Hong of course is more or less just great, 大河. It joins the law. So the law is a river, quite a minor stream that runs from the north to the south into the Yellow River. I think it runs first into the Wei River and then to the Yellow River. But anyway, the waters that Du Fu is looking at, it will go first into the Luo and then into the Yellow River. And then it will reach the Tongguan Pass or the Hangu Pass, the passes that that separate basically east and west in this part of China. And he says, Will it even be 2 nights until then? 起信宿 hardly be 2 nights. 信宿 is 2 nights. And then Du Fu turns a bit prophetic. He says, 应陈数周末，如听万事哭. It will probably drown several prefectures. This, at least now, the language-wise, it's not difficult anymore, and it is as if I can already hear 10,000 homes weeping. He hears people crying out of the flood that hasn't even reached them yet, because he understands this is a calamity, and of course he thinks of the general calamity of the empire as well. 秽浊书未清，风涛怒犹续. Here I don't agree with the translation again. I think 清, the direct object of this 清 is 秽浊. Or you can say also that this is this is the subject, or the grammatical subject of Qing. The foulness, the turbidness has not yet cleared out, because the filth has, as if there is too much filth that the flood needs to sweep away. It has not yet been cleared out, and thus, the wind and the waves just keep on roaring. There's still fury in reserve. So 续 is to hold something in reserve. The magazines of fury have not been spent yet. 风涛怒犹续, because the filth has not yet been swept away, which is also really a powerful idea, which is very related to this Du Fu's general idea of which he has given many hints of, the empire being corrupt. So there's filth that has to be swept away, but it won't go in a day. 何使通舟车，阴气不惨毒. This is interesting because in this case, this is actually one sentence in both of these lines, and Owen very correctly translates exactly like that. When will boats and wagons get through, and the shadowy vapors not be so black? So 惨毒 is black, more or less. It's black and opaque. So it's just a word. 浮生有荡语，无道正机数. In this life adrift, 浮生 is really, it's a fixed term in Chinese letters. Our life is like a floating thing. It's something that carries us now here, now there. It's something we have no control over. We don't have any real choice in our basic situation. So therefore, life is called 浮生. And 浮生, in our 浮生, there is 荡语. 荡语 is to flow forward rapidly. And 无道正机数. 机数is as constrained. Yes. No problem there. 无道, the way of Du Fu, my own course. But it's also the way of Du Fu, the way with the big W. Because, his essential being is also now in such circumstances that, he cannot find an outlet, but he's also swept along by the tide of the times. He can't do what he wants to do really from the bottom of his heart, to put his ruler in reputation above the great mythical emperors and so on. It's not possible for him in the situation that the world finds itself in right now. 人寰难容身，石壁华侧足. So now at this point, it's difficult even to stay alive, he says. 人寰, the human realm, the world of man, perhaps as opposed to the world of the gods. It is hard to find space for oneself, yes. A stone cliff slippery with feet set at an angle. Set at an angle, 侧足. And the image here is that, because of fear or because of any other reason, one doesn't stand on the sole of the foot, but on the sides of the foot. And now his existence is as if standing on a slippery stone cliff on the side of his feet like that. So I don't know. Perhaps, this also refers to an actual path that he's traveling at this point. It's not impossible. But in any case, the larger metaphorical sense is clearly fully present and even predominant in this line, I would say. He's talking really much more of the larger situation than describing the actual surroundings that he is in, though he might be doing that as well, because he's a genius. Here comes more wonderful poetry. 云雷真不已，艰险路更急. This is worth going into. 云雷, clouds and thunder. 真不已, mass. This really doesn't capture it. So, 准, this is an image that comes from the I Ching, actually. So, from the Book of Changes. And it's, 准 is a hexagram in the I Ching. And it is associated with the image of thunder. But the text of the hexagram 准 in the I Ching revolves around the initial difficulties in something or of something that is coming into being, And the association with thunder is quite interesting because it's as if, thunder was the difficult birth of rain, more or less. So you can see that, the thunder and the clouds, they are an image of something trying to be born from the chaos, more or less. And we don't know what that is because it's just still at the first stages of inception. And he hears thunder, but the associations, that he takes from this it's this larger sense, which is modulated here by the words of the classic. And in this, when he thinks about this, his path seems even more cramped, as ju, by danger and trouble. Yeah. Ju, the original sense here is of ju is to bend down, but more concretely it's to encounter obstacles. So thunder makes a difficult road even harder for Du Fu at this point. 普天无川两，欲济远水缩。普天, anywhere under heaven, and无川两, no river bridges. The image of crossing a river, or rather being incapable of crossing a river, we have seen before in the last poem I talked about. Again, this is clearly more than Du Fu's concrete situation. The wording is too grand for that. I want to cross, and I wish the waters would retreat. Yeah, from all under heaven, not just from here. And therefore, 因悲中领事，未托重于父. Also, who is 中领事? The gentleman in the woods. 中领事 instead of 临终士. 临终士 would perhaps be more intuitive from a grammatical standpoint, but we have this 中领事 already in the Shi Jing. It's basically a fixed poetical combination. These are gentlemen in the woods. They are men who have retired into the forest, people who have perhaps given up on an official career like Du Fu has. Even they are swallowed up by the calamity. Men like himself, perhaps, by the general flood. These are the people he is grieving for. They will not escape. They will not escape the bellies of the many fish. This is quite interesting. They will be eaten by fish. They will drown and they will be eaten by fish. And this is quite an original image. But being in the belly of a fish sounds quite familiar for us from the tale of Jonah and the fish and stuff like that. But that is not intended here. The last two couplets are easy language-wise. 举头向苍天，安得起鸿鹄. You can see the translation. Wonderful ending, I think. He seems to have solved his ending problem. I've said that several times, that Du Fu has had an ending problem. Well, he has overcome his ending problem. This sums it up very well. He just lifts his face skywards and looks for a great bird that can take him on his back to escape this horrible situation. He ends it superbly, I think, here with a great image. So that is the entire poem. Quite a long one, quite an interesting one, and there are more, many more like this when Du Fu starts fleeing in earnest, because he will make a long journey throughout all of China, going both here and there, not really being pursued by anyone, but all that's trying to find somewhere there where there's reasonably calm and there are people who can help him. So wherever he goes, he will make these observations that make us think of the larger situation, and that is really one of the great strengths of Du Fu as a poet. He makes us think of the universe when he describes a little rock. And with that, I leave you. Thank you for listening, and bye.